Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. As I've said a few times already this week, it's Pittsburgh week around it, but it doesn't feel like the same Pittsburgh week. It does at least have some familiarity around here at WNST for my guests. This guy, he's probably my favorite Pittsburgh guy. Don't tell Bouchette or any of the rest of those guys that, because this guy was like really an Orioles fan who has disdain for the Pirates, even though he puts pictures of himself up with Dave Parker on his Twitter. He is Will Graves AP. He is getting ready for a Penguins run, a Pirates offseason, and yet another Ravens-Steelers game. This is weird, right? No Roethlisberger, no Flacco, no Suggs, just no AB, right? Different times here this week, right?
Yeah, and it was, much the same with the Bengals here last week. Vontaze has moved on and AB's moved on. A lot of the bad blood that had developed between those two guys has sort of dissipated. I mean, if you watched the game on Monday, it wasn't played at a high level or with much intensity. So I do anticipate the play level to be up this week with the Ravens. But yeah, there's definitely been a decrease in cabin pressure, as they say. I think it's not quite as there's so much else going on with the Steelers right now that sort of remembering that you hate the Ravens is not at the top of the priority list.
Well, yeah, when they were 0-3 and they beat a JV squad. The Ravens are 2-2 and they certainly beat a JV squad in Week 1 and in Miami. You mentioned that it was not the highest level of play. Yeah, okay, I watched it. I see that Cincinnati stinks. I don't know what the Steelers are. But I'll tell you this, I turned to my wife and I'm like, yeah, I want to watch this Mason Rudolph and the offensive line looks good. It looked like they're playing in slow motion versus sort of the pitch and catch we've seen around here with Le'Veon Bell and AB. And, before that, Hines Ward, go down the list of all the stuff you've seen that we've seen, usually under bright lights, usually on a Sunday night or a Monday night. All of this. I mean, I'm getting in the car and doing it up and back. I mean, 1 o'clock Sunday kickoff and Mason Rudolph and Lamar Jackson. And even Lamar Jackson is sort of new to your side of the fence, right?
Yeah, and I think, the game plan against the Bengals was designed really based on two things. One, the receivers have not been good. Everybody talked about, and we've all written about at great length, oh, hey, AB's gone, the drama's gone, whatever. Well, guess what happens when you also lose an elite talent? Your production goes down, your opportunities go down. The group that he left behind is not, it's not good. Juju is he's the number one, but there's really nobody else that scares you. So he's getting double teamed, and he's not getting catches. He's not getting targets. He had 3 for 15 against the Bengals. It'll be very interesting to see how he'll react. Can you imagine how nuclear he would have, the AB would have gone after a 3-catch, 15-yard game if he was still here? So, I don't think Juju's going to do that, but the group behind him, Moncrief has been terrible. He got benched after he had the drops in Week 1, got benched in Week 2 when he let a pass go off his hands and turned into a pick that turned the tide of the game. James Washington was Mason Rudolph's college teammate. Everybody thought, oh, man, with Mason over, James is going to take off. He had 1 target and did not have a catch against the Bengals. That's part of the problem. And the other problem is the run game hasn't been great. So they went to that wildcat formation and used those short passes almost as like extended handoffs to try to get something going in the run game, which is, it worked, but it was the Bengals.
Well, it padded his stats too, right? Like you look down, you're like, oh, look at this Mason Rudolph. He's the most efficient guy this side of Phil Simms, right?
Right. The thing about Rudolph is, the reason the Steelers became enamored with him is because, Kevin Colbert was up in the press box, a row behind me, in 2017 when they came in with Oklahoma State and played Pitt, and he threw, I think it was like 492 in 2.5 quarters. I'm pretty sure that's right. He was just throwing it all over the place, and now it's like, it's like they put a governor on a Ferrari. I'm not saying that he is an elite quarterback by any stretch, but his strength, they have done nothing to accentuate it, and the part of the problem is because they don't have the guys to do it. That's a real issue for them going forward.
Well, it was a real issue around here for Joe Flacco for a number of years, right? Right. The fact that you can throw it there if there's nobody open and you have no protection and your running game so-so. And, all the things you're describing are very, very what I saw the other night, which it feels like it's slow motion versus what I'm used to seeing those jerseys do over the last 15 years offensively.
And
Since the bus went away, right? Yeah.
Right. It's interesting. Now, people are, and me, myself included, are sort of like, because the game has changed in the last 15 years, you're sort of like, man, this is pretty lame. But let's not forget, it's not like when Ben Roethlisberger took over in 2004, he was throwing it all over the lot. I mean, he wasn't. They had two good running backs. They had a really good defense. And that's what they used to go 15-1 that first year. So it's not like Ben took over and he started throwing for 350 and 3 touchdowns every game. I mean, that's something that happened over the course of time. And they also developed elite talent at those skill positions to help them do that. But with Mason, they took 2 deep shots against the Bengals. The first one, this is how bad it is. Johnny Holton, who was a special teams ace for the Raiders, is now on the field running deep patterns, and he's on the field because he's supposed to be the fastest guy they have. Well, he had 0 separation. Mason threw it anyway, and the refs called a ticky-tack, offensive pass interference against Holton. And the other one was a busted coverage by the Bengals that Deontay Johnson turned into a touchdown. So they have not taken the shackles off. I think they need to at some point, but the problem is, what's the point in taking the shackles off if you throw it down the field and the guys can't catch it? So it'll be, I think if they're going to win, if the Steelers are going to be competitive, I don't expect the bottom to fall out necessarily, but the defense needs to be really good all the time. And I'd say the offense cannot turn the ball over. And if that means you're throwing, pop passes to guys running in motion in front of you to do it, then that's what you have to do.
Will Graves has been covering sports up with Yins and Not up in the Berg, even though he is more of a D.C. beltwayer. You can find him at Will Graves AP and at the Associated Press. And, of course, all of their work appears on the front of our website, whether it's Pirates or Penguins or Steelers or Pitt or, in this case, this week, this mismatch of 2 teams wearing jerseys with, your fans are going to say, who are these guys? Maybe not who's Matt Judon or who's Justin Tucker or Marshall Yanda, but most of the rest of this, and I would also say defensively this week, we've talked so much about the struggles of the offense and Mason Rudolph, we can even get back to that, but just where the defense is in all of this when the Ravens drafted this whole thing to give teams like the Steelers fits, to have to force some of their bigger bodies off the field, to try to tax, what they're doing with linebackers, what they're doing with safeties and cornerbacks, to run around and play what the Chargers did last year, was sort of a 92 defense with 9 DBs or 8 DBs and sort of weird positioning. Where are the Steelers on chasing Lamar Jackson around and chasing around this kind of an offense? They haven't been so stout against the run, right?
No, they haven't. They haven't when they've needed to be. Seattle in the second half in week 2 was able to run the ball late. They chewed off the final 5:30 of that game. It was a 2-point game. The Steelers didn't get the ball back because they couldn't get off the field. San Francisco, when it wasn't dropping the ball or trying to give the Steelers the game, ran the ball pretty well. So, they've not been great, but Jackson presents a problem that they haven't faced yet, a guy that can get around and move. I think that's one of the many reasons they traded with the Dolphins to get Minkah Fitzpatrick, because that is a guy that, he can do a lot of things with, and I would imagine part of his job on Sunday is going to be creep up to the line of scrimmage and make sure Lamar Jackson doesn't do Lamar Jackson things. And then, look, it's pretty funny. So my career, with the AP, I was in newspapers for 10 years. I started in the AP in 2006 in Louisville, and I was there for 5 or 6 years. I've always had an affinity for the Cards since I left. It was always funny to me how people, when Lamar got into the league, everybody's like, well, he can't pass. And, look, I'm not saying that he's Joe Montana, but the idea that he could not throw the ball effectively was always sort of funny to me. And to see what he's been able to do passing-wise has been impressive. But to me, the most impressive play I have seen in the NFL this season was against the Chiefs. I think it was late on that drive. It was late when he scrambled and scored on, it was an 8 or 10-yard touchdown. But it was so funny. He gets to the 10, he makes a move, he gets to the 5, and there was a Chiefs linebacker or DB in the way. And that poor guy was just sitting there like, oh, my God, this is going to suck. And how casually Lamar, sidestepped him and walked into the end zone was stunning. And I don't know if anybody in the NFL has got anybody or two guys that can keep Lamar from doing that.
I saw him going to have a run, and I said there are helmets and shoes strewn all across the field. Because there is a little bit of an aftermath of that where you don't know what he's going to do next, right? And that's part of the show.
He doesn't know
right?
what he's going to do next, and that's part of the reason he's such an entertaining player to watch.
Well, we're going to be entertained. Will Graves up in Pittsburgh covering the Steelers and waiting for the Ravens to get up there and really waiting to try to figure this out. We're at the quarter pole with both of these programs, and the one thing I know, despite watching them get blasted by the Titans in week 1, boy, the Browns came in here and just put a woodshed on the Ravens. And, I've seen a lot of things over 20 years. To see a happy Browns quarterback on the field that I feel like I might see next year victoriously in Baltimore, after a bit of a bloodletting, like the final score was way closer than the game was, although it did get close for a period of time. The next play it didn't get close again. And then we don't see the Browns again until Christmas week out there, and then the Steelers come in here to end the season. And it feels to me like the Ravens and Steelers are going to be playing some catch-up. And I know the Browns have a couple of tough games ahead, but they have a real sled at the end of the year. I mean, they have a very, very easy schedule. All the Miamis and the Cincinnatis that we're getting out of the way, they get them all at the end of the year.
Right. I mean, everybody in Pittsburgh this week, not me, but my colleagues have been writing, well, if they beat the Ravens and the Browns lose with the 49ers, they're tied for first place. I still don't think we know anything about the Steelers. I mean, I think that they're not going to be terrible, but it's hard for me to envision them doing the defense getting 8 sacks or 9 sacks a game or producing 5 turnovers every game. And it's just hard to imagine that happening. That I think, the key to their development is going to be, can their skill guys and their line do enough to keep Mason Rudolph, to let Mason Rudolph, A, stay upright, and B, be effective going down the field. And the thing here is, and this is, I'm going to profess my insight into my Redskins upbringing. I mean, the first NFL game I went to was an '83 championship game where they beat the Cowboys.
So what you're saying is you're channeling your inner Russ Grimm right now. Is what
what happened? So look, Ben had his surgery, and he says he plans on coming back. But if you look at the offense, I don't think it matters. I don't think people are going to be looking at Mason. He's going to get a lot of blame one way or the other, depending on how the season goes. If you looked at the first 6 quarters of Roethlisberger's year, he was not great. And part of the reason he was not great is because the guys around him weren't great. And this sort of reminds me a little bit of the Redskins in '85, where, you had a quarterback that was in his late 30s. His skills were diminishing. The team was getting older, and he was having a terrible year. And then Lawrence Taylor broke Joe Theismann's leg in half. Now, if you look at Theismann's numbers up until that point in the season, they were bad. I mean, I think it was 8 touchdowns and 16 picks. They were 5-5, I think, or 4-5, or 5-6 going into the game. He gets hurt. Here comes Jay Schrader, who to this day, I'm the only person in the world that can say this, literally my favorite football player of all time. And he came in and gives us like, oh my God, I got a guy that can throw the ball 70 yards down the field. And so, he had a 5-year run, 3 with the Redskins and a couple with the Raiders, where he was an upper tier quarterback in the NFL. I'm not saying that Mason Rudolph is that guy, but I think when you look at like regime changes or whatever, I mean, I do sort of think the pieces are in place that if Rudolph does play pretty well, the Steelers are going to have a very interesting decision to make next spring.
Well, and cheap quarterbacks are in. You know what I mean? Trust me.
Right.
That's where we are here, and that allows you to do other things. And they've got an offensive line built around them. Yeah, Will, I want to ask you in the aftermath of the whole Antonio Brown thing, and I didn't even talk to Ed Bouchette about it. I haven't talked to other people about this week, but the aftermath of all of that, I mean, you were involved in all that. I mean, the Facebook Living and having to talk about that and write about that and be a part of that, and that's part of the oxygen in the room. You know what I mean? Like, we've, played 24 years of football here, and we've had Jamal Lewis go to jail, Ray Lewis go to jail, Ray Rice. We've had those sort of distractions and all that sort of stuff. We've never had Terrell Owens. We've had Tony Saragusa and some other characters around here. Ray was his own character. But, man, we've never had that sort of not getting along with the coach, not being a part of the team. We've had off-the-field issues, but we've never had bad teammates around here.
Well, I mean, the thing about it is, I got here in 11. It was his second year. He was buried on the depth chart. I mean, they had Hines. They had Mike Wallace. They had Emmanuel Sanders. They had Heath Miller. I mean, he was the, fifth option at best. And he was a human being, to be honest with you, at that point. And then, it was very interesting to watch in real time the evolution into when he became AB. Now, when you say not a good teammate, I mean, I think he was a good teammate. His work ethic is legendary. I mean, I had, one of my favorite guys that's been here since I've been here, Darius Hayward-Bay. He and I were talking one time about his work ethic. Yeah, and a great guy. I mean, an all-time great guy. And, we were talking, and he said, look, Will, the receivers, we'd go out on Wednesday night. We'd go to, Nakama, which is a Japanese restaurant. And, we'd go there, and we'd eat a ton of sushi, and maybe a couple of us had a couple of drinks, and we're thinking about practice the next day. And I'd get home, and I get a text from AB at 11:30 saying, hey, let's go right now, in terms of going and working out and doing this thing. I mean, AB's teammates respected him because of how hard he worked. But the problem is, as his profile grew, as his star grew, as his production level grew, I mean, there was nobody to kind of keep him in check. And everybody,
it's fascinating to watch a guy become Johnny Bravo, isn't it? I mean, Ray Lewis in 1996 was just a kid from the farm, in Lakeland who went down to Miami, and then he becomes the preacher and all of that, right? And I becomes Dion, sort of, right? And I can't evaluate that. 23 years later, I'm still looking and saying, I don't know what it's like to one day be a kid from Lakeland and the next day everybody wants a piece of you, right? So there is that rock star part of, look, Roethlisberger almost went to jail, maybe should have went to jail, and if you asked the people in Georgia, probably said he would have went to jail. So there's all that that goes on too. So there is a part of that star thing, and especially when you're the sixth-round kid on the bench, in the footsteps of everybody, but to see it, right, to your point, to see him be a sixth-round draft pick and turn into this guy that's Facebook Living while the coach is saying don't do it, that's a bad teammate to me, Will. That's a guy that, as a guy that's managed people, I can't have that. I call that wildcatting. I can't have that on my team, man. You can't win like that.
But Mike Tomlin, to his credit, was able to sort of rope him back in, occasionally. But the problem is, the problem with AB's biggest problem is that there was just way too much time between the end of the season and the start of the next. That is exactly what happened in this case. What he did to get himself out of Pittsburgh, I consider to be, one of the most disrespectful in general acts I've been around. I remember one day at the end of the season, Art Rooney sits around with the beat writers and does a round table for 20 or 25 minutes. And we're in there one day, this is, mid-January, and, I'm recording, and AB is literally taking shots at Mr. Rooney, while we're in the room, he's off to wherever it is, but he's posting stuff on Instagram. I'm like, Art, how can you, this is just this is disrespectful. How do you handle it? Now, at the time, they were trying to make sure that they posited his position as, one that they could come back from, in the sense that maybe there's a chance he could come back to the team because they needed to keep his trade value high. And, yeah, the guy was an absolute piece of work. But the problem is, let's remember the last time that he played a full game in a Steeler uniform was Week 16 against the Saints, and he was the best player on the field, and it wasn't close. It wasn't even close to close. He was unbelievable. And as long as he would – all this stuff would happen off the field, but then on Sundays he would play and he would be great and it would go away. And the problem that's happened is he went too long.
Dude, a guy's been thrown out of 3 organizations in
6 months. Yeah, it's his fault. Trust me.
It's one of the more unbelievable stories. Like the Maradona story came. I haven't seen it yet. Everybody's raving about it on HBO this week, and I will watch it at some point when I get 2 hours to do. But the part where like the president, right? Where you go from being a guy to thinking you're the king of the world, and you still have to function within a 53-man football team. And
Right.
Tomlin put up with this for years. And to put up with it, as we found out from the clown running the country, is to enable it. You know what I mean? To allow it is to encourage it, right? Whatever it is.
Right.
And by the time he got to Oakland, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, right? And now, Lord knows, with the mental health, I mean, all things aside, seems like this kid only had football and had nothing else ever, and now football has been taken away. I mean, who knows? Maybe some CFL team will want to put up with him. I don't know.
No, I mean, you are absolutely correct. I mean, and you're right. I mean, he was given. Now, Marquise Pouncey told me once, I was doing a profile on Tomlin, I think when he got to around 100 career wins, and he said, look, Will, Coach T treats everybody equally, but he doesn't treat everybody the same. And he said, Chris Hubbard, who now plays for the Browns, was walking as a backup lineman at the time, and he's like, do you think Hubs can get away with what AB can get away with? And of course not. So yes, they enabled him, and they built a monster. I mean, that was at training camp in 2018. He shows up in the helicopter. There was a Nike bus that had shown up that day that had AB on it or whatever, because he was obviously a Nike athlete at the time. And while Ben Roethlisberger is the only guy with Super Bowl rings left on that team, and everybody else is staying in the dorms at St. Vincent College, AB's staying in this nice plush Nike tour bus that's perched in the parking lot above the dorms. So yes, I do certainly think the Steelers deserve some of the blame, and I certainly believe there are mental health issues at play here. Absolutely, I always thought that he equates money to respect. That is the bottom line. He equates money to respect, and when he saw the money that OBJ was getting and some of these other guys, he's like, I need to get paid. I need to get my money. And so that's the reason he orchestrated the trade. I thought he was at least smart enough to not burn. I figured I told Josh Dubow, our great writer out there in Oakland, I said, hey, man, I think you're going to get 1 year of decent behavior because he just wants to get paid. And once he gets to Vegas, who knows what the hell is going to happen. I am stunned that he burned $30 million, and then 2 weeks later, he burned $15 million. I mean, that speaks to mental health issues that go far beyond anything to do with football or whether the guy's a jerk or not. So, while I'm a big, Schadenfreude guy or whatever. I mean, I'm glad he's got it coming to him. I mean, he was disrespectful to Bouchette, to me, to beat writers, to team staff members. I mean, I saw it firsthand. I experienced it firsthand. And everybody was sort of shocked when he got to Oakland, and it turns out he's a jerk. Well, yeah, he was. The problem was in Pittsburgh, he'd be a jerk, and it'd be on Tuesday it would be a story, and on Sunday he'd go for 9 for 156 and a touchdown, and everybody would forget. And he went 9 months without playing football and had too much time on his hands to self-destruct, and that's what's happened.
Will Graves is here. He's covered them all up there with the ins and that in the Berg. He's an AP sports writer. His work appears at WNST.net. You can find him out on Twitter at Will Graves AP. And I want to give you a little platform here because I do Baltimore positive work around here, and you can hear Calvin Ball, Howard County executive. You can hear Brandon Scott, our Baltimore City Council president, Ben Cardin, John Sarbanes, Baltimore Homecoming, Bill Ferguson next week, all of that at Baltimore Positive. But you sort of do a Pittsburgh positive thing. So I would take all the time you wish to explain your story and what you do in regard to blood donation and your own battles.
Well, in 2014, I was at the Olympics in Russia. Come home, I'm not feeling great. Get some blood work done. Get a call from the nurse. Hey, you need to go to the hospital right now. I wake up. I spend 3 days in the hospital, and it turns out I have a form of cancer, leukemia of lymphoma called Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia, which is a mouthful. The gist of it is basically I got a genetic mutation that doesn't allow the red blood cells to grow normally in my bone marrow, which means when it does flare up, basically I don't produce healthy red blood cells. So as the healthy ones die off and need to be replaced by the ones in the bone marrow that are unhealthy, you basically very, very, very slowly suffocate internally because you're not getting oxygen in your system to where you need to go. So you become anemic. Your actions become labored. It takes more and more exertion to do simple tasks, and over time, if undetected, it goes pretty bad. There are treatments. I have had chemotherapy. I did 18 cycles in 14 and 15. I have one next in a couple weeks it flared back up last summer. I have one in a couple weeks, and then I'll be done, hopefully in the clear for a couple of years. But basically, so while that stuff is good and the medicine's working, I received, especially in 14 and 15, many blood transfusions to kind of keep me going.
Same time as my wife did as well. You both were battling in 14 and 15. So, I'm familiar when the platelets arrive. Yes.
So when you're, I used to donate blood when I was, in my 20s, but it was, mostly an excuse to kind of get out of work for an hour or to kind of cleanse my karma, for lack of a better phrase. I'm going to do something good for somebody else because I was a jerk to my coworker last night or whatever. And it's a very different experience when you're on the other end. When you're sitting there and they bring the blood in and they hook you up and give it to you, I've never had a more humbling experience in my life than sitting in the chairs at UPMC East and having, bag after bag after bag over the course of months come in to kind of keep me going. So I'm an advocate. I do volunteer for the Red Cross, although not as much lately as I used to, which I need to. I was talking to my wife a couple weeks ago that I need to correct. But if you're thinking about donating blood, if you're thinking, the needle hurts, I get it. If you're thinking I'm worried about being lightheaded afterwards, I get it. But it's one of those things that I think the experience, the anxiety of the actual act versus the act itself is not proportional. I think I have yet to meet a person that has had, and I go to the blood drives and I check people in and I chat them up and I, very briefly, shorter than this, I tell them my story and thank them for their donation. That's basically let them know that the blood isn't going to some random storage facility forever, that it is actually going to find a home in somebody else's body and help keep them going. So, if you're thinking about it, give it a shot one time. There's free Cheez-Its, there's free cookies, there's orange juice, there's soda. We bring enough. Usually, we give away
maybe even
stress
cupcakes.
balls
Who
or
knows?
T-shirts
Right?
or whatever. There's swag that goes along with this. It doesn't have to be the Red Cross. It doesn't have to be Central Blood or Vitalin or whatever they're calling themselves these days. Any opportunity, if it's something that you've thought about doing, I just encourage you to kind of give it a shot. I think you'll do it. You'll feel better about yourself when you're done. And it is there's always a shortage. Whenever you see these humanitarian crises across the country, whether it's a hurricane or a flood or tornadoes or whatever, and these services get knocked out, and sometimes we lose blood that's been stored because of that. There's always a shortage. There's always a need. It doesn't cost any money. You don't have to. I'm sorry, it's not tax deductible, but maybe God will give you a rebate when you get upstairs. Okay, so please just consider it. And for those that have donated, I cannot thank you enough. I'd imagine for all the animosity that the Steeler fans and Raven fans have for each other, if you're sitting there in a chair at Hopkins, or if you're sitting in a chair at UPMC, and it shows you where the blood came from on the bags. It shows you where the blood came from. Not without naming the individual,
Sure.
of course, but it does tell you it came from here, it came from there. If you see Baltimore, if you're sitting in a Pittsburgh hospital and you see Baltimore on a bag of blood that's coming to you, you're not thinking, I can't have this blood. Maybe that guy likes Ray Lewis. You're thinking, thank God this person took an hour out of their day at some point in the last 2 months to do this for somebody, and that person happened to be me.
Hey, Will, man,
sure it's the same vice versa.
My wife had her life saved on the bone marrow registry, so I'm down with everything you're saying. But how about this? She is his twin, right? Because she makes his blood in her body. He called her this summer and invited her to be the best person in his wedding next year. So we got things going on around. We got to fly to Germany next April. So we got business to attend to. I'm Pittsburgh this week. I appreciate your good word on behalf of platelets and blood donation and life saving and all that good stuff. You can find Will Graves AP. He's in Pittsburgh. He's on WNST.net on our website many times with all things, even Clint Hurdle and what happened there in Pittsburgh and the Penguins and all that stuff. Will, take care. We'll see you up there at Mr. Rooney's Cookies Sunday at 1, all right?
All right, man, I'll see you.
Will Graves joining us here. The buy a Toyota.com audio vault is there for you mobily from anywhere in the world. You can listen to what you want, when you want, where you want, how you want, whenever you want. It is the buy a Toyota.com audio vault. I am Nestor, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and with Yins and Nat in Pittsburgh, as well as Luke out in Owings Mills all week long, and Baltimore positive mojo happening. We got mojo. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports and beating the Pittsburgh Steelers.